Before we begin this journey of honor and redemption, please take a quick second to hit that subscribe button. It helps us bring more stories like this to life. Now, let's enter the office of Elias Thorne. The air conditioning in the corner office hummed with a detached, artificial efficiency, the only sound filling the uncomfortable silence between two men. It was a sterile noise designed to filter out the chaotic life of the city 10 floors below, but right now, it only served to amplify the tension. Elias Thorne sat on the edge of a mid-century modern chair that was designed more for aesthetics than comfort. He was 42 years old, though the lines around his eyes suggested a man who had lived through several lifetimes. His hands, resting on his knees, were still, perfectly still. It was a stillness that unnerved people, though they could never quite articulate why. It was the composure of a predator at rest, or perhaps a guardian who had seen too much to be startled by something as trivial as a termination notice. Across the mahogany desk sat Marcus Sterling. Sterling was a man of soft edges and expensive tailoring, the kind of regional manager who spoke in buzzwords and measured human value in quarterly spreadsheets. He adjusted his silk tie, avoiding Elias's gaze. He looked at a spot on the wall, then at his tablet, then finally, fleetingly, at Elias. "It's not a decision we made lightly, Elias," Sterling said, his voice carrying that practiced tone of corporate regret, hollow and rehearsed. "We're restructuring the logistics division. The company needs to lean out, you understand." Elias didn't blink. He understood perfectly. But he also knew that restructuring was a polite fiction. This wasn't about economics. This was about the incident last Tuesday. This was about integrity. "Is that what we're calling it, Marcus?" Elias asked. His voice was a deep baritone, quiet but resonant. It didn't carry anger, only a weary disappointment. "Restructuring?" Sterling cleared his throat, a nervous tick that betrayed him. "Your performance metrics were adequate, but the team dynamic has shifted. We feel your leadership style is a bit rigid for the modern corporate environment. We need flexibility, Elias. We need people willing to adapt to the gray areas." "Gray areas," Elias repeated, tasting the words. "You mean lying about the supply chain delays to the investors?" "Creative forecasting," Sterling corrected sharply, his face flushing a faint pink. "Look, let's not make this difficult. HR has prepared a severance package. 2 weeks' pay. You sign the NDA, you hand over your badge, and we part ways amicably." Elias looked at the man. In a different life, in a different world filled with sand and smoke, Elias had led men who would have walked through fire for him. He had made decisions where the cost of a mistake wasn't a dip in stock value, but the lives of fathers and sons. He looked at Sterling and felt a profound sense of dislocation. He was a lion being lectured by a hamster on how to hunt. "I don't need the 2 weeks," Elias said, standing up. The movement was fluid, effortless. Sterling actually flinched, leaning back in his leather chair. "Elias, be reasonable." "I am being reasonable, Marcus. I'm leaving." Elias reached into his pocket, pulled out the plastic ID card that had granted him access to this glass cage for the past 3 years, and placed it gently on the polished mahogany. It made a soft click. "You can keep the package. I won't sign your NDA. If anyone asks why I left, I'll tell them the truth, that I don't do creative forecasting when it involves safety regulations." Sterling's eyes narrowed. The veneer of politeness vanished. "You walk out that door without signing, and you're unhireable in this city, Thorne. I'll make sure of it. You're a middle-aged logistics coordinator with a gap in his resume and a bad attitude. Who do you think you are?" Elias picked up the cardboard box he had packed earlier. It was light. A stapler, a framed photo of a dog that had passed away years ago, and a solitary, tarnished challenge coin he kept face down on his desk. "I'm just a guy walking home," Elias said. He turned and walked out. He didn't slam the door. He closed it with a precision that was far more insulting than a slam. It was the closing of a chapter, silent and final. As he walked through the open-plan office, colloquially known as the bullpen, heads turned. The office grapevine traveled faster than light. Everyone knew. He could feel the eyes on him. Pity from the secretaries, smug satisfaction from the junior executives who found his silence intimidating, and fear from the few who knew why he was actually being fired. He passed Sarah's desk. She was the junior analyst he had protected. She looked down at her keyboard, tears in her eyes, unable to meet his gaze. She knew he was taking the fall for her mistake, a mistake she made under pressure from Sterling. Elias paused for a microsecond, just long enough to give her a subtle nod. "It's okay," the nod said. "Hold the line." Then he was at the elevators. The doors slid open with a cheerful ding. He stepped inside, pressed the button for the lobby, and watched the sterile gray carpet of the corporate world vanish as the steel doors slid shut. He was unemployed. He was 42. And as the elevator descended, gravity pulling at his stomach, Elias Thorne felt the crushing weight of humiliation. Not because he lost the job, but because he had tried so hard to fit into a world that had no place for honor. The heat of the Chicago afternoon hit him like a physical blow the moment he stepped out of the revolving doors. It was a humid, oppressive heat that rose from the asphalt and seemed to shimmer in the air. The noise of the city was instant, a cacophony of taxi horns, construction jackhammers, and the low, constant roar of thousands of conversations blending into white noise. Elias adjusted his grip on the cardboard box. It was such a cliché. The fired man carrying his box of shame. He felt like a prop in a bad movie. He loosened his tie, unbuttoning the top button of his dress shirt. The fabric felt restrictive. For 20 years, his uniform had been functional. Tactical gear designed for survival. Boots built for endurance. Now he wore cheap polyester blends that didn't breathe. Disguising himself as a civilian drone, he began to walk. He lived 4 miles away, in a small, tidy apartment in a quieter neighborhood. He could have taken the subway or hailed a cab, but he needed to walk. He needed the physical rhythm of movement to process the adrenaline that was quietly spiking in his blood. "Situation report," his mind whispered automatically. It was a habit he could never break. Crowd density, high. Threat level, low. Exits, multiple. He navigated the sidewalk with the unconscious grace of a gray man, the military concept of blending in so perfectly that you become invisible. He flowed around tourists stopping to take photos, sidestepped distracted businessmen on phones, and anticipated the movements of bike messengers weaving through traffic. As he walked, the sensory details of the city became hyper-real. The smell of roasting nuts from a street vendor, the metallic tang of exhaust fumes, the reflection of the sun on the glass skyscrapers that loomed over him like canyon walls. He looked at his reflection in a shop window. A tall man, broad-shouldered, with short, graying hair and a face that didn't smile easily. Who is that? He wondered. For the last 3 years, he had tried to be Elias the logistics manager. He had learned to make small talk about the weather. He had learned to care about profit margins. He had learned to swallow his pride when men like Sterling, who had never risked anything greater than a golf handicap, lectured him on risk management. He looked down at the box in his hands. Inside, the challenge coin slid around. He hadn't looked at the face of that coin in years. It was from his old unit. SEAL Team 4, the Brotherhood. The contrast between his past and his present was a physical ache in his chest. In the teams, trust was the currency. You didn't need contracts or NDAs. You had the man to your left and the man to your right. If you said you would do something, you did it, or you died trying. There was a brutal, beautiful simplicity to it. Here, in the civilian world, words were smoke. Sterling had praised him last week and fired him today. Sarah, whom he had mentored, had remained silent to save her own skin. Don't blame her, Elias thought, correcting himself. She has a kid. She needs the insurance. Fear makes people do selfish things. You can't expect civilians to have combat discipline. But it hurt. It hurt to be discarded. It hurt to feel useless. He stopped at a crosswalk, waiting for the light to change. A sleek sports car revved its engine loudly, the driver looking impatient and self-important. Elias watched the vehicle with a detached curiosity. He remembered a different kind of vehicle. He remembered the hum of a helicopter rotor blade cutting through the heavy air of a foreign night. He remembered the feeling of purpose. When you are a Navy SEAL, you know exactly who you are. You are the tip of the spear. You are the solution to problems no one else can solve. Now, he was a statistic, a line item deleted from a spreadsheet. The light changed to walk. The white silhouette of a pedestrian flickered. Elias stepped off the curb. Left foot, right foot. Just keep moving. He was walking away from his livelihood, walking toward an empty apartment, with no plan B. The uncertainty should have terrified him, but as the blocks passed, the fear began to transmute into something else. A simmering, cold anger. Not at Sterling, but at the system, at the lie that if you play by the rules, work hard, and have integrity, you will be rewarded. He had played by the rules, and he was walking home with a cardboard box. To understand why Elias was walking home, and to understand what was about to happen on that street, one has to understand the nature of the choice he had made that morning. It is rare that a man's entire character is tested in a sterile conference room, but that is exactly what had happened. The educational aspect of leadership is often lost in the corporate world. They teach management, not leadership. Management is about manipulating resources, money, time, people, to get a result. Leadership is about stewardship. It is about protecting those in your care, even at personal cost. 3 days ago, the quarterly audit had flagged a discrepancy in the shipping manifests. $50,000 worth of high-end electronics were unaccounted for in the tracking system. It wasn't theft. It was a clerical error, a data entry mistake that had routed the shipment to a holding facility in Ohio instead of the distribution center in Chicago. The error was Sarah's. She was 24, bright, eager, and overwhelmed. She had been working double shifts because Sterling had fired the other analyst to save budget. She was exhausted, and she had typed a 4 instead of a 5 in the zip code. When the error was discovered, the shipment was late. The client, a major tech retailer, was furious. They threatened to pull the contract. Sterling had called Elias into his office yesterday. "We need a head on a platter, Elias," Sterling had said, pouring himself a sparkling water. "The client wants blood. They want to know we've purged the incompetence." "It was a typo, Marcus," Elias had argued, "caused by fatigue. The shipment is found. It's on a truck. It'll be there tomorrow. No harm, no foul." "Perception is reality," Sterling snapped. "I need you to write up Sarah for gross negligence. We fire her, tell the client we removed the problem, and we move on." Elias had felt the temperature in the room drop. "Sarah is the best analyst we have. She's doing the work of 2 people because you cut the budget. If you fire her for a typo, You destroy her career over a systemic failure that you created. Sterling had smiled, a cold reptilian expression. Then you take the hit, Elias. You're the manager. It happened on your watch. Either you give me Sarah, or the incompetence is yours for failing to supervise her. It was the classic prisoner's dilemma, distorted by corporate power dynamics. And in that moment, Elias had flashed back to a ridgeline in the Hindu Kush Mountains 8 years ago. Operation Blindside. They had been compromised. Enemy fire was raining down from 3 sides. His comms officer, Reaper, had taken shrapnel in the leg. The extraction chopper was 2 minutes out, but they couldn't move Reaper fast enough. The standard protocol for a force that size might have been to provide cover fire and retreat to a defensive position, potentially leaving the wounded in a protected but isolated spot until the area was cleared. But Elias didn't operate on standard protocol. "We move together," Elias had roared over the sound of AK-47 fire. He had grabbed Reaper's vest, hauling the man up. "Nobody stays! Nobody!" He had taken a bullet to his shoulder plate during that drag. It cracked a rib, knocked the wind out of him, but he didn't let go. He carried the weight. He took the heat. Because that is what a leader does. Back in the office, facing Sterling, the choice was the same. The bullets were just different. "Sarah stays," Elias had said quietly. "If someone has to go for this, it's me. I signed off on the manifest. My signature is on the bottom line. It's my responsibility." Sterling had looked surprised, then opportunistic. "If that's the way you want it, your salary is higher anyway. It helps the bottom line even more." So, Elias was fired. He took the bullet. Now, walking down Fifth Avenue, the sun beating down on his neck, Elias replayed that moment. He wondered if he was a fool. A dinosaur with a code of honor that was extinct. Was it worth it? He asked himself. He thought of Sarah keeping her job. He thought of her little girl. Yes, he decided. It was. But that didn't make the walk any easier. The box was getting heavy. His arms ached. He was just passing the grandiose architecture of the Federal Reserve Bank when he felt it. It wasn't a sound at first. It was a vibration. A low-frequency tremor traveled through the concrete of the sidewalk, up through the soles of his cheap dress shoes, and resonated in his bones. It was a feeling he hadn't felt in years, but his body recognized it instantly. It was the specific, heavy, aggressive vibration of heavy diesel engines and armor plating. Elias stopped. He looked up from the pavement. The ambient noise of the city seemed to dip. The taxi horns faded into the background as a new sound emerged, a deep, guttural growl that was getting louder by the second. It wasn't a construction truck. It wasn't a city bus. Elias turned his head, his eyes scanning the intersection behind him. His pupils dilated. His breathing shifted from the shallow rhythm of a walker to the deep, controlled intake of a soldier. Something was coming. The vibration grew from a tremor in the soles of Elias's shoes into a rattling in the windows of the skyscrapers lining the avenue. It wasn't just sound anymore. It was pressure. For the average civilian walking down Fifth Avenue, this was just noise. Perhaps a construction crew or a particularly aggressive convoy of delivery trucks. But Elias Thorne's brain didn't process sound like a civilian. His neural pathways had been rewired years ago in the crucible of Bud-S, basic underwater demolition, SEAL training, and tempered in the fires of deployment. Educational insight. The Cooper Color Code. In the tactical world, mental states are categorized by colors. Most people live in condition white, unaware, distracted, looking at their phones, completely vulnerable. When Elias left the office, he was in condition yellow, relaxed alert. He knew who was around him, but he wasn't targeting. The moment that vibration hit a specific frequency, the low-end torque of a turbo diesel engine displacing massive amounts of air, Elias snapped instantly into condition orange. Specific threat identified. Potential danger imminent. He stopped walking. He instinctively moved closer to the limestone facade of the bank building. Cover. It wasn't much, but it broke the line of sight from the street. Then, they turned the corner. It was a sight so incongruous with the setting that the brain struggled to process it. Rolling down the wide paved avenue of the financial district wasn't a delivery truck. It was a Humvee, high-backed, up-armored, painted in matte desert tan that looked alien against the cool grays and blues of the city glass. An antenna whipped violently in the air from the rear bumper. But it wasn't alone. Behind it came a massive MRAP, mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicle. This was a beast of war, a six-wheeled fortress of steel designed to survive IED blasts that would vaporize a tank. Its tires were almost as tall as a person. The engine roar was deafening, a mechanical scream that bounced off the canyon walls of the city. One vehicle is a curiosity. 2 is a coincidence. 3 is a convoy. There were 4 of them. The traffic on the other side of the road ground to a halt. Taxis slammed on brakes. Pedestrians froze, their phones lowering, their mouths opening in that universal expression of confusion that precedes panic. In a city like Chicago, seeing military hardware this heavy usually meant one thing. A disaster movie was filming, or a disaster was happening. Elias tightened his grip on his cardboard box. His heart rate, which should have spiked to 150 beats per minute, actually slowed down. This was the combat calm. While the civilians around him began to murmur and point, Elias's vision narrowed. He was scanning for indicators. Are the gun turrets manned? No. Are they moving at speed or slowing down? Slowing. Is this a National Guard deployment for a civil emergency? No, the markings were wrong. These weren't guard trucks. These were darker, specialized. No unit patches visible on the doors. That detail sent a cold spike of adrenaline into his gut. No unit patches usually meant special operations. What is going on? A woman next to him whispered, clutching her purse. Is it a terrorist attack? No, Elias said, his voice low and automatic. They aren't in a defensive posture. They're looking for something. Or someone. The lead Humvee slowed to a crawl. The massive tires crunched over the asphalt. The convoy was dominating the road, forcing the frantic city traffic to bleed into the margins. The sheer size of the machines made the luxury sedans and SUVs look like toys. Elias felt a bead of sweat roll down his spine. He was exposed. He was standing on the sidewalk, a man in a cheap suit holding a box of office supplies, staring down a column of steel that represented his past life. Don't run, he told himself. Running triggers the predator response. Stand fast. He felt foolish. Why would they be here for him? He was a logistics manager. He was a nobody. The paranoia of his old life was bleeding into his reality. But then, the lead vehicle didn't just slow down. It stopped, right in front of him. The screech of the brakes was violent. It was the sound of metal biting into metal, a harsh, abrasive scream that cut through the humidity. The massive MRAP behind the Humvee pitched forward on its suspension as it halted, the air brakes hissing like an angry serpent releasing venom. The entire street went silent. The honking stopped. The conversations died. The only sound was the idle rumble of those massive engines, a sound that felt like a heartbeat in the chest of every person on the block. Elias stood his ground. He was 10 feet away from the lead vehicle. He could smell the diesel exhaust, thick, oily, and nostalgic. It smelled like Kandahar. It smelled like Ramadi. It smelled like the best and worst days of his life. Educational insight. Auditory exclusion. In moments of extreme stress, the human brain prioritizes visual information over audio. It filters out irrelevant noise to focus on the threat. As the passenger door of the lead Humvee kicked open, the sounds of the city, the wind, the distant sirens, the murmurs, vanished for Elias. All he could hear was the metallic clack of the door latch and the heavy thud of combat boots hitting the pavement. A soldier stepped out. He wasn't wearing the dress blues of a recruiter. He wasn't wearing the crisp camouflage of a reservist on weekend duty. He was wearing operational gear, multicam pants, a tight tactical t-shirt that clung to muscular arms, and a plate carrier. He wore sunglasses, despite the shadows of the skyscrapers. He was followed instantly by 3 others from the rear vehicle. They moved with a synchronization that was terrifying to behold. They didn't walk. They flowed. They fanned out, creating a secure perimeter around the vehicles, their eyes scanning the crowd not with malice, but with professional detachment. The civilians on the sidewalk gasped and backed away, creating a wide semicircle of empty space. In the center of that space stood Elias Thorne. He looked ridiculous to himself, a man in slacks and a dress shirt, holding a cardboard box with a stapler, facing a fire team of elite operators. The soldier in the lead, a man with a thick beard and a scar running through his left eyebrow, pulled down his sunglasses. His eyes were intense, scanning the faces in the crowd. He looked at the businessmen. He looked at the tourists. He looked right through them. Then his gaze locked on Elias. Elias didn't flinch. He held the gaze. It was a challenge. In the military hierarchy, you respect the rank. But in the Brotherhood of Special Operations, you respect the eyes. You look for the 1,000-yard stare, the look of a man who has seen the elephant and lived to tell about it. The soldier took a step forward. He didn't raise a weapon. They weren't armed with rifles, Elias noticed, with a sudden wave of relief. Only sidearms in holsters. But his posture was aggressive. He cupped his hands around his mouth, his voice booming with the diaphragm power of a non-commissioned officer who had shouted over helicopter rotors for a decade. "Where is the ex-Navy SEAL?" The question hung in the air like a thunderclap. The pedestrians looked around wildly. They looked at each other. A Navy SEAL? Here? In the financial district? They were looking for a superhero. They were looking for someone who looked like a movie star, someone 6'5", with muscles bulging out of a suit. They didn't look at Elias. They saw a tired, middle-aged man who had just been fired. They saw the slump in his shoulders. They saw the cardboard box. To them, Elias was the invisible man. The soldier's eyes didn't waver from Elias. He took another step, closing the distance. "I said," the soldier roared, his voice cracking with urgency, "we are looking for Chief Petty Officer Elias Thorne. Does anyone have eyes on him?" The name hit Elias like a physical blow. Hearing his rank, his real title, not logistics manager, spoken aloud in this concrete canyon felt like a violation of the secret life he had built. A young woman near Elias, noticing the intense stare of the soldier, slowly turned her head. She looked at Elias. She looked at the box. Then she looked back at the soldier. "Him?" she whispered, pointing a trembling finger. "The guy who just got fired?" The soldier ignored her. He walked straight up to Elias, stopping only 2 feet away. He towered over Elias, not in height, but in presence. The energy radiating off him was kinetic. Elias put the box down on the concrete. He did it slowly. He stood up straight, his spine aligning, the years of corporate slouching vanishing in an instant. He squared his shoulders. I'm Thorn, Elias said. His voice was quiet, calm. Identify yourself. The soldier stared at him for a long, agonizing second. The crowd held its breath. Was this an arrest? Was this a court-martial? Had the fired man done something terrible? Then, the soldier's face broke. The intense, scary mask of the operator shattered, replaced by a grin that stretched from ear to ear. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated joy. "My God," the soldier said, his voice dropping to a normal human tone. "It is you. You got old, boss." Elias blinked, the recognition finally cutting through the context. The beard threw him off. The scar was new. But the eyes? "Rodriguez?" Elias asked, stunned. "Little Rod?" "Not so little anymore, Chief," the soldier laughed. Before Elias could react, Rodriguez didn't handcuff him. He didn't read him his rights. He threw his arms around Elias in a bear hug that knocked the wind out of him, lifting the ex-SEAL off the ground. The hug lasted 3 seconds, but it communicated more than words ever could. It was the embrace of survivors. It was the physical manifestation of a bond forged in mud, blood, and fear. Rodriguez set him down, stepping back but keeping a hand on Elias's shoulder. "We've been looking for you for 6 months, Elias. You went dark. No social media, no VA check-ins, nothing. You vanished. I wanted a quiet life," Elias said, his voice thick with emotion he was trying to suppress. He looked around. The crowd was filming. Dozens of phones were raised. He hated it. "I wanted to be normal." "Normal?" Rodriguez scoffed, gesturing to the gray skyscrapers. "You? Working in a box like this? You're a racehorse pulling a milk cart, Elias. It doesn't fit." "Why are you here, Rodriguez?" Elias asked, his tone shifting back to the pragmatic. "You didn't bring a convoy into downtown Chicago for a reunion. You're burning thousands in fuel and causing a traffic nightmare." Rodriguez's expression sobered. He stepped back and signaled to the MRAP behind him. The massive side door of the armored vehicle swung open. "We didn't come for a reunion," Rodriguez said softly. "We came because the classification order was lifted yesterday." Elias felt a chill. "The Valley?" "The Valley," Rodriguez nodded. "Operation Red Wings 2, the rescue mission. The one the brass buried because of the political fallout." Elias closed his eyes. The Valley. A mission where everything that could go wrong did go wrong. A mission where Elias had made a choice, similar to the one he made with Sarah, but with much higher stakes. He had disobeyed a direct order to retreat in order to recover a team pinned down by enemy fire. He had saved 6 men that night, but because he disobeyed orders, he was quietly discharged. No parade, no medal, just a plane ticket home and a "thank you for your service. Now, get out." "It's declassified?" Elias whispered. "Full transparency," Rodriguez said. And not just that. From the dark interior of the MRAP, another figure emerged. This man was older. He wore the crisp, immaculate dress-white uniform of a Navy admiral. The gold stripes on his sleeve gleamed in the sun. He wasn't an operator. He was high command. The crowd gasped again. Even civilians understood the visual language of an admiral's uniform. It commanded respect. Admiral Vance stepped onto the dirty Chicago sidewalk. He looked out of place, a pristine symbol of authority in the chaos of the street. He walked toward Elias. The soldiers, Rodriguez and the others, snapped to attention. They didn't salute the admiral. They turned and faced Elias, standing at attention for him. "Chief Thorn," Admiral Vance said, his voice carrying the weight of institutional authority. "I believe you left the Navy with some unfinished business." "I left with my honor, sir," Elias said stiffly. "That was enough." "It was enough for you," the admiral corrected. But it wasn't enough for the Navy, and it certainly wasn't enough for the men you saved. The admiral gestured to the soldiers standing around them. "Look at them, Elias." Elias looked. Really looked. There was Rodriguez. But behind him was Miller. And taking off his helmet near the rear truck was Doc Sanders. These were the men from the valley. The men who were supposed to die that night. The men Elias had risked his career and his life to pull out of the fire. They were alive. They were standing there, breathing, healthy. Some had scars, yes, but they were alive. They petitioned the Pentagon every week for 5 years, the admiral continued. They refused to let the file stay buried. They demanded that the record be corrected. Elias looked at his cardboard box sitting on the ground. Inside was the cheap stapler and the photo of his dead dog. 10 minutes ago, he felt like a failure. He felt like a man who had been chewed up and spit out by a system that didn't care about right and wrong. "We aren't here to arrest you, son," the admiral said, his voice softening. "We're here to escort you." "Escort me where?" "To Washington," Rodriguez grinned, stepping in. "The president signed the order this morning. You're receiving the Navy Cross, Elias, and we're the honor guard taking you to the airfield." The silence on the street was total. The pedestrians, the cynical New Yorkers, the distracted tourists, they all lowered their phones. They looked at the man in the cheap suit. They looked at the cardboard box of a fired employee. And then they looked at the tears standing in the eyes of the toughest men on the planet. Elias swallowed hard. The lump in his throat was the size of a grenade. I just got fired," Elias stammered, the absurdity of the situation hitting him. "I don't even have a job." Rodriguez laughed, a booming sound. "Fired? You? Who fired you?" Elias pointed a thumb back at the glass building. "Marcus Sterling, regional manager." Rodriguez's eyes narrowed. He looked at the building, then at the admiral. "Sir," Rodriguez said, "we have a schedule to keep, but I think we have time for a quick detour. We can't leave our brother's reputation in the mud." The admiral smiled. It was a rare, mischievous smile. "I believe the convoy needs to make a U-turn anyway. If we happen to enter the lobby to ask for directions, that would be within protocol." Elias felt a panic rising. "No, guys, let it go. It doesn't matter." "It matters," Rodriguez said, his face hard again. "You took a bullet for us. You think we're going to let some suit disrespect you?" He turned to the other operators. "Form up. We're going inside." The lobby of the Sterling and Finch Logistics Building was a temple of minimalism. It was all white marble, brushed steel, and abstract art that cost more than a family car. It was designed to whisper money. That whisper was about to be drowned out by the roar of reality. The revolving doors, designed for the solitary passage of rushing executives, were not built for a tactical formation. Rodriguez kicked the handicap access button. The automatic glass doors slid open with a terrified whoosh. Elias walked in first, but this time he wasn't the slumped figure of a fired employee. He was walking point. Behind him, in a wedge formation, were 4 Tier 1 operators. Behind them, walking with the measured gait of a man who owned the ocean, was Admiral Vance. The sound of combat boots hitting Italian marble is distinct. It is heavy, rhythmic, and authoritative. Thud, thud, thud. The receptionist, a young man named Kevin, who spent most of his day on social media, looked up. His phone slipped from his hand and clattered onto the desk. He blinked. He rubbed his eyes. "Sir," Kevin stammered, standing up, "you can't, you need a badge to—" Rodriguez stopped at the desk. He didn't lean over it. He just looked at it. He placed his helmet on the pristine white counter. The scuffed, dusty Kevlar looked like a meteorite that had landed in a sterile laboratory. "We're here to see Mr. Sterling," Rodriguez said. It wasn't a question. Do you have an appointment?" Kevin squeaked. Admiral Vance stepped forward. "I am Admiral Thomas Vance, commander of Naval Special Warfare Group 2. My appointment is the United States Constitution. We are escorting a decorated hero to retrieve his personal effects. Call up." Kevin didn't argue. He didn't ask for ID. He dialed. His hands were shaking so hard, he misdialed twice. 2 security guards approached from the elevators. They were retired cops, bulky men in ill-fitting blazers. They saw the uniforms. They saw the sidearms, holstered but visible. They saw the look in Miller's eyes, a look that said, "I have dismantled insurgents in caves. Do not try me with a taser." The guards exchanged a look. Educational insight. The OODA loop in social dynamics. The guards were stuck in the observe phase of the OODA loop. Observe, orient, decide, act. The visual data, Navy SEALs in the lobby, didn't match their mental model, delivery guys and businessmen. While they were trying to orient, the SEALs had already acted. "Good afternoon, gentlemen," Elias said to the guards. He knew them. He had asked them about their weekends for 3 years. "We're just going up to the 10th floor." Sure, Mr. Thorne," one guard said, stepping aside instinctively. "Elevator C is open." "Thank you, Jerry," Elias said. The team swept past security. They entered the elevator. It was a tight squeeze. The mirrored walls reflected a strange tableau. A man in a cheap suit, surrounded by the most lethal fighting force on Earth. "This music," Doc Sanders muttered, looking at the ceiling speaker playing a soft jazz cover of a pop song. "It's aggressive. It's designed to pacify." "Relax, Doc," Rodriguez grinned. "We're in civilian territory now. The only threat here is boredom and bad coffee." Elias looked at the floor numbers ticking up. 4, 5, 6. His heart was hammering. This felt harder than a raid. In a raid, you know the enemy. Here, the enemy was social convention. The enemy was the shame he had felt 20 minutes ago. "Chin up, Chief," the Admiral said softly, standing at the back. "You didn't do anything wrong. Remember that. You held the line. Now let them see what the line looks like." Ding. The doors opened on the 10th floor. The bullpen, the open-plan office where 50 analysts sat in cubicles, was usually a hive of low-level noise. Typing, murmuring, phones ringing. When the elevator doors opened, the noise didn't taper off. It was severed. Elias stepped out. Behind him, the wall of camouflage and muscle followed. Heads popped up over cubicle walls like prairie dogs. Jaws dropped. A coffee mug was knocked over, spilling brown liquid onto a desk. But nobody moved to clean it up. They stared at Elias. The man they had watched walk away in shame less than an hour ago was back. And he had brought the cavalry. Elias walked down the center aisle. He didn't look at the floor anymore. He looked straight ahead, toward the glass office at the end of the hall. Sarah was at her desk. She was wiping her eyes with a tissue, still crying over the guilt of Elias taking the fall for her. She looked up. Her eyes went wide. She saw Elias. Then she saw the Admiral. Then she saw the operators. Elias paused at her desk. The convoy stopped instantly behind him. The discipline was absolute. "Elias?" she whispered. "It's okay, Sarah," Elias said gently. "Work the problem. Don't let the data back up." I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "Don't be," Elias said. "You have a job to do. Do it well." Rodriguez leaned in, winking at the terrified young woman. "He's a good boss, isn't he, ma'am?" "The best," she choked out. "We know," Rodriguez said. "We trained him." They continued moving. The whisper network was exploding. Texts were flying. "OMG, Elias is back. He's with the military. Is he being arrested?" No, the Admiral is smiling. They reached the glass office. The door was closed. Inside, they could see Marcus Sterling standing up, gesturing angrily at a speakerphone. He was in the middle of a crisis call, likely trying to smooth over the client relationship he had just jeopardized. Elias didn't knock. He opened the door. Sterling spun around, his face red with irritation. "I told you, I am not to be disturbed." The sentence died in his throat. His office, usually spacious, suddenly felt like a closet. It was filled with men who took up space not just physically, but psychically. Sterling looked at Elias. He looked at the Admiral. He looked at the operators blocking his doorway. "What is the meaning of this?" Sterling demanded, though his voice wavered. "This is private property. You can't just barge in here with a militia." "It's not a militia, son," Admiral Vance said, his voice cutting through the room like a cold wind. "It's the United States Navy." The Admiral walked to the desk. He didn't sit. He stood, looking down at the regional manager. "I understand you terminated Chief Petty Officer Thorne's employment this morning," the Admiral said. Sterling adjusted his tie, trying to regain his corporate composure. "Mr. Thorne was let go for performance issues. This is an internal HR matter. And frankly, bringing his buddies to intimidate me is grounds for a lawsuit." "Intimidate?" Rodriguez chuckled darkly from the back. "If we wanted to intimidate you, you'd be under the desk, not behind it." "Stand down, Rodriguez," Elias said sharply. "Aye, Chief," Rodriguez replied instantly, snapping his mouth shut. Sterling blinked. He saw the dynamic. The scary man with the beard obeyed Elias. "We aren't here to argue your HR policies," Elias said calmly. "I left something behind." "Your box is gone," Sterling sneered. "Building services took it to the dumpster." "Not the box," Elias said. "My reputation." The speakerphone on Sterling's desk crackled. "Sterling! Are you there? Who walked in? Did I hear Admiral?" Sterling froze. He had forgotten the client was still on the line. It was Mr. Henderson, the VP of Operations for the tech retailer, their biggest client. Admiral Vance looked at the phone. He reached out and pressed the speaker button firmly. "This is Admiral Thomas Vance, identifying myself for the line. To whom am I speaking?" "This is Jim Henderson," the voice said, sounding confused but respectful. "Sir, Mr. Henderson," the Admiral said. "I apologize for the interruption. We are currently debriefing Mr. Thorne. I understand he was managing your logistics account until this morning." "Yes," Henderson said. "Sterling told me Thorne was fired for negligence, said he lost a shipment." Elias stood silent. He wouldn't defend himself. That was the rule. You don't make excuses. But the Admiral didn't have to follow Elias's rules. "Negligence," the Admiral repeated, tasting the word like sour milk. He looked at Sterling. "Mr. Sterling, are you aware that the man standing before you was awarded the Silver Star for organizing a supply chain of medical goods through 300 miles of hostile territory in a blizzard? He managed logistics for a task force of 2,000 men with 0 loss rate." Sterling's mouth opened and closed. That's different. This is corporate logistics." "You're right," the Admiral said. "It is different. In your world, a mistake costs dollars. In his world, a mistake costs lives. If Elias Thorne says he didn't lose the shipment, he didn't lose the shipment. If he took the blame, he was covering for someone. Because that is what leaders do. They eat last." There was silence on the phone line. Then Henderson spoke. "Sterling?" "Yes, Jim," Sterling squeaked. "Did Thorne take the fall for the analyst? The new girl?" Sterling turned pale. It was a management decision to—" "Shut up," Henderson snapped. "Admiral, is Thorne there?" "I'm here, Mr. Henderson," Elias said. "Elias, I'm looking at the logs right now. The shipment was found in Ohio. It was a typo. You didn't type that manifest. I know your signature. You signed off on the review, but you didn't key the entry. It was my team, sir, Elias said. My responsibility. Honorable, Henderson said. Stupid, but honorable. Sterling, you fired the only guy in your building who knows how to actually lead people. I'm pulling the contract. Jim, wait! Sterling shouted, panic seizing him. We can fix this! Elias, tell him! You can have your job back! I'll double your salary! The room went deadly quiet. Elias looked at Sterling. He saw a man who had no core, no center. A man who shifted with the wind of convenience. Then Elias looked at Rodriguez, at Miller, at Doc. Men who had bled for him. Men who had come back for him. I can't take the job back, Marcus, Elias said softly. Why not? Sterling pleaded. It's a 20% raise. Because I have a previous engagement, Elias said. Where? Sterling asked, desperate. Amazon? FedEx? Who is hiring you? Admiral Vance placed a hand on Elias's shoulder. The White House, the Admiral said. Sterling froze. Chief Thorne is being recalled to active duty for a period of 48 hours, the Admiral announced, his voice projecting so the people outside the glass office could hear, to receive the Navy Cross for gallantry in action. After that, well, he has been offered a position as a senior instructor at the War College, teaching leadership, something this office is sorely lacking. Elias turned to Sterling. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the challenge coin, the one he had taken from the box earlier. He placed it on Sterling's desk. Keep it, Elias said. What is it? Sterling whispered, looking at the heavy brass coin. It's a reminder, Elias said. On the back it says, Non sibi sed patriae. Not for self, but for country. Try to run your team like that, Marcus. You might be surprised at the results. Elias turned on his heel. Admiral, I'm ready to go. Lead the way, Chief, the Admiral said. They walked out. As they passed through the bullpen again, the silence had changed. It wasn't shock anymore. It was reverence. Sarah stood up. She started to clap. Slowly at first, then picking up speed. The guy in the next cubicle joined in. Then the whole row. Then the whole floor. 50 people stood up, applauding the man who had walked out in silence an hour ago. Elias didn't wave. He didn't bow. He kept his eyes forward, his face neutral, the picture of composure. But inside, the broken pieces of his self-worth were knitting back together. They reached the elevator. The doors closed, shutting out the applause, shutting out the corporate world, shutting out the life that hadn't fit him. He was back in the company of wolves. And for the first time in 3 years, he was home. The heavy steel door of the MR-Ape slammed shut, sealing Elias inside a world of darkness, green tactical lights, and the smell of recycled air and gun oil. The transition was instantaneous. Outside, the Chicago sun was bright, and the air was humid. Inside, it was cool, dim, and loud. The suspension groaned as the massive vehicle rolled forward, merging back into traffic, this time with a police escort that had materialized to clear the path for the Admiral. Elias sat on the bench seat, his back against the spall liner. He loosened his tie, finally ripping it off and stuffing it into his pocket. You look like you're wearing a costume, boss, Miller said from across the aisle, chewing on a toothpick. Miller was the team's breacher, the guy who knocked doors down. He had a grin that could disarm a bomb. It felt like a costume, Elias admitted, leaning his head back against the hull. For 3 years, I've been pretending to care about quarterly projections. You were deep undercover, Rodriguez joked from the front seat. The ultimate gray man. Nobody suspected you were a lethal weapon. They just thought you were, what was it, logistics? Logistics is important, Elias defended automatically, then caught himself. He laughed, a rusty, dry sound. Yeah, it was deep cover. Educational insight, the concept of tribe. Seton's Sebastian Junger, in his book Tribe, explains that soldiers often miss war not because they like killing, but because they miss the intense social cohesion of the unit. In modern society, we are often isolated, living individual lives. In a platoon, you are a single organism. As the convoy rumbled toward O'Hare Airfield, Elias felt a physical sensation of relief. It wasn't just that he had been vindicated in front of Sterling. It was that he was back in the tribe. His nervous system, which had been vibrating at a low-level frequency of anxiety for years, finally settled. He was safe. Not because of the armor plating, but because of the men sitting next to him. So, Doc Sanders said, looking at Elias with clinical eyes. How are you, really? Physically? I'm fine, Doc. Knees ache when it rains. The usual. And mentally? Doc pressed. You went ghost on us, Elias. We worried. Elias looked at his hands. I didn't want to be that guy. The veteran who hangs on to the glory days. I wanted to move on. I thought if I cut ties, I could build something new. But I didn't build anything. I just dug a hole and hid in it. Admiral Vance, who had been reviewing messages on a secure tablet, looked up. You didn't hide, Chief. You survived, the Admiral said. Transition is the hardest mission. There's no briefing for it, no extraction plan. You get dropped into civilian life with a DD-214 and a handshake, and you have to figure out who you are when you aren't carrying a rifle. The vehicle hit a pothole, bouncing heavily. But you learned something back there, didn't you? The Admiral asked. Learned what? That you can take the man out of the teams, but you can't take the code out of the man. You sacrificed your job for that girl. That was a tactical decision. You assessed the threat to her career. You took the hit. That's not logistics, Elias. That's protection. Elias nodded slowly. She didn't deserve to be a casualty. Exactly, Vance said. Which is why you're going to be a hell of an instructor. The ceremony was not what Elias expected. He had imagined, in his darker moments, that if he ever received the Navy Cross, it would be posthumous. His mother would receive it, weeping, while a flag was folded into a triangle. Instead, he was standing in the East Room of the White House. The chandeliers were terrifyingly expensive. The carpet was so soft, it felt like walking on moss. He was wearing his dress blues. They were tight. Rodriguez had to help him get them tailored in a rush job at the base in Virginia. But they fit. The gold chevrons on his sleeve, the ribbons on his chest. It was a history of his life, written in fabric and metal. The President of the United States stood next to him. The citation was being read. For extraordinary heroism while engaged in military operations against an enemy of the United States, Elias didn't hear the words. He was zoning out. This was a common physiological response to high-stress ceremonial events. Disassociation. His mind drifted back to the valley. He felt the cold snow. He heard the snap of the bullets. He felt the weight of Miller on his shoulder as he dragged him. He smelled the copper scent of blood. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a man who had done what was necessary. Chief Petty Officer Thorne's bold initiative, undaunted courage, and complete dedication to duty reflected great credit upon himself and upheld the highest traditions of the United States Naval Service. The President turned. He held the medal, the Navy Cross. It was heavy, a dark bronze cross with a white and blue ribbon. As the medal was pinned to his chest, Elias looked into the crowd. There were senators, generals, dignitaries, But in the front row, sitting with awkward posture in uncomfortable chairs, were Rodriguez, Miller, Doc, and the rest of the team. They were clean-shaven, mostly, wearing their dress uniforms. Miller gave him a small thumbs up, and in that moment, the imposter syndrome that had plagued Elias for 3 days vanished. He realized the medal wasn't for him. He was just the vessel. The medal was a crystallization of that night. It was proof that they had survived. It was proof that their brotherhood meant something in the real world, not just in the dark. The president shook his hand. "Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Mr. President," Elias replied. The camera flashes went off, blinding and rapid. Tomorrow, this photo would be in the papers. Marcus Sterling would see it while drinking his morning coffee. The clients would see it. Sarah would see it. The secret was out. The gray man was gone. 3 hours later, the pomp and circumstance were over. Elias sat on a bench in Lafayette Square, just across from the White House. He had loosened his collar. The medal was in its velvet case, resting on his lap. The sun was setting, casting long orange shadows across the Capitol. Admiral Vance sat down next to him. He held 2 coffees in paper cups. He handed one to Elias. "Black, no sugar," Vance said. "Thank you, Admiral." They watched the tourists taking photos of the White House. "So," Vance said, taking a sip, "the job offer. The War College, Newport, Rhode Island. It's nice this time of year. Less humidity than D.C., certainly less than Chicago." Elias looked at the coffee steam rising. "Sir, I haven't taught in a classroom since ever. I'm an operator. I do things. I don't talk about things." "That's exactly why we need you," Vance said. "We have plenty of academics who can quote Clausewitz and Sun Tzu. We have plenty of officers who know the theory of leadership. What we need is someone who knows the cost of leadership." Vance turned to face him. "You saw what happened in that office with Sterling. That is the world we are sending our young officers into. A world where metrics and optics matter more than truth. We need you to teach them that integrity is the only currency that doesn't devalue." Elias thought about Sarah. He thought about the fear in her eyes. He thought about how easy it would have been to let her take the fall. "I called her, by the way," Elias said. "Who?" "Sarah, the analyst." "And?" "I told her to update her resume, and I told her that I gave her name to a friend of mine who runs logistics for a disaster relief NGO. They need people who can handle pressure. She's going to interview on Monday." Vance smiled. "See? You're already mentoring. You're already leading." Elias looked at the White House, then down at the medal case. He realized that for the last 3 years, he had been mourning his past self. He thought Elias the SEAL was dead, and Elias the civilian was a ghost, but neither was true. He was just Elias. The values didn't change just because the uniform did. "I'll take the job," Elias said. "Good," Vance nodded, standing up. "Report date is Monday. Pack your bags." "Oh, and Elias?" "Sir? Get rid of that cheap suit. You're on a government salary now. Buy something that fits." 6 months later, a lecture hall at the Naval War College. The room is filled with young ensigns and lieutenants, the future leaders of the Navy. They are bright, ambitious, and nervous. The room quiets down as the instructor walks in. He walks with a slight limp. The rain is coming, but his posture is impeccable. He wears a simple blazer and slacks, but they are tailored perfectly. He walks to the podium. He doesn't have a PowerPoint presentation. He doesn't have a laser pointer. He places a single object on the podium, a challenge coin. He looks out at the sea of faces. "My name is Elias Thorne," he says, his voice filling the room without a microphone. I am not here to teach you how to shoot, how to plan a raid, or how to read a map. You can learn that in the manuals. He pauses. He makes eye contact with a young officer in the front row who looks terrified of failing. Just like Sarah looked. I am here to teach you how to walk home. Elias says, I am here to teach you that the hardest decisions you will ever make won't happen when the bullets are flying. They will happen when it is quiet, when you are alone, when the only thing watching you is your own conscience. He picks up the coin. Lesson 1, he begins. Never leave your integrity behind, because it is the only thing that will come back to save you.